there's a huge demand going forward for individuals who are knowledgeable in supply chain and can work with the supply chain to help address emissions. It's maybe LinkedIn would provide a good indication how many organizations on LinkedIn are looking for sustainability managers, because sustainability managers would be tasked with the big field of carbon accounting and carbon management, because what you said earlier about supply chain just indicates scope 3 emissions. So, scope 1 direct emissions by a company, for instance, through driving cars, scope 2, mostly the consumption of electricity, and then the huge field of scope 3s, which are emissions outside of the immediate control, happen upstream and downstream of an organization. And it's a growing field as the maturity in the market rises and organizations are looking more towards the scope 3s. So there's a huge demand going forward for individuals who are knowledgeable in supply chain and can work with the supply chain to help address emissions in the supply chain, but also downstream of an organization. So there's huge demand, but still as part of carbon accounting and carbon management. And usually these roles are called CSR in organizations, would be CSR manager or sustainability manager. These are the usual titles that have this under their remit. And so a good indication would be to have a look on LinkedIn to see the number of job ads out there for sustainability, CSR, ESG managers for organization. Because I don't know about the States or Nigeria, but here in Australia, there's such a shortage, extreme shortage of these people. So you would be looking for ESG, sustainability, climate change, and then the secondary one is officer, manager, coordinator, consultant, manager. So these combinations, if you had a look on LinkedIn to see how many job ads there are, you get an idea of the demand, and that's current. And of course, projected is going to be an explosion, and we need to start training people now because we need those skills in the market. And there's a delay, of course, between training them and them being fully functional in the workplace. So it needs to start now.
As Lisa said earlier, we've gone through your bio. But you could also point some things out to make it different. What is your education and work background?
Yeah, so I grew up in Austria, and I got my master's degree from the University of Business Administration and Economics in Vienna. So I really studied, I came from a background of business and business administration and economics. And I specialized in my second half in IT. And then I got selected to go over to New York University, where I studied at Stern. And I also mostly focused on IT and communications as well. And then my whole career started out in IT. And later on in risk management. And I went into cybersecurity, which was really interesting, but my heart wasn't in it. And I felt that my values weren't aligned with my job. And it was also the time that I had my 2 children. So shortly before my second child was born, I decided that I need to do something about climate change and needed to align my values with my work life. And so I ditched my whole career in cybersecurity and started my own firm in 2009 to provide sustainability consulting services. And so what happened then was that it was 2 things. Firstly, I started my own firm. And then secondly, I didn't have the sustainability background. So I worked really hard on acquiring the skills myself. There wasn't much available at that time because 2009 there weren't many courses, but I did find a short course in carbon accounting at one of the Australian universities called Swinburne. I don't think the course exists anymore, but it was a short course which taught carbon accounting. And that's how I came into the field of carbon accounting. I was quite excited by it, that you can actually calculate the carbon emissions that are caused by human activities. That really, really excited me. And so I started to specialize in that. And then there was another vocational training course that I found in carbon management back then. I don't think it exists anymore, but I took that one. But by that time, I'd studied so much and learned so much that by the end of the course, they asked me to teach it. So I ended up teaching that particular vocational training course for almost a year. So that was in 2010, 2011. And since then, yeah, my whole career has been specializing in carbon accounting. It was also the time that the Greenhouse Gas Protocol released the guidance on how to account for carbon in organizations, later on for products, and then later on for communities, which is what you're really interested in. But yeah, that's my background is. So I came from like business administration to IT, to cybersecurity, risk management, and then over to sustainability, and then within the field of sustainability, specializing in the field of carbon accounting and carbon management.
What specific occupation? Okay, sorry. What inspired you to end the greenhouse gas? Oh, you said that before. You said it earlier. Yeah. So, but what specific occupation, that means job titles and industries, are best served by this particular accreditation, that the city planner?
Yeah. So I guess the target audience for this course is firstly carbon accountants who want to help communities, but also their countries establish their carbon and greenhouse gas inventory. So that's the obvious target group for this exam. But I guess that city planners themselves in municipalities might be interested in taking the course, although it is very, very, very technical. So I guess the primary target group would still be people that want to move into the carbon accounting space.
And I wonder, Ophelia, if I can add to that, that we saw you had a couple of other accreditations.
Mm-hmm.
If you consider the GRI reporting,
Yep.
one of them, and that was really interesting. And that space seems to be kind of shifting, the reporting space kind of reconsolidating. And there was another one that I had never heard of. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind referring to those two and in a similar light.
Which ones?
Well, the GRI reporting, and then the other one that I'd never heard of. Ophelia and I were WhatsApping back and forth.
Registered consultant for climate active carbon neutral certification.
Yeah, good. So let's start with that. So Climate Active is a program that exists in Australia, which is a Commonwealth government run program that allows organizations to be certified carbon neutral. It's a rigorous, highly trusted program run by the government, which enables companies to make claims on carbon neutrality that are substantiated by evidence, by very rigorous standards. And it's something that's unique if you look at it worldwide. There aren't many programs worldwide that allow you to do that. So we've got the Climate Active program in Australia. We've got TOI2, which is a government-run program similar to Climate Active in New Zealand. And then we've got the PAS 2050 standard in Great Britain, which you can get certified to. But the recent developments here is that the ISO standard is going to release a new standard on carbon neutrality, which is currently in the consultation phase, but that's going to come out soonish. And that will allow companies to be accredited to the new ISO standard and to declare carbon neutrality. But the Climate Active program have preempted this standard, but by a long way because it has existed since 2009. So yeah, it's a fantastic program, which unfortunately doesn't exist at the moment in the United States, and I don't think there is a program in Nigeria either. So you guys have to wait for the ISO standard to be released.
Did not know. Maybe Ophelia, you knew about the new ISO standard. That's, I guess, would it be in the 14,000 series with environmental management?
Yes, it's 14084, I think. It's in the most recent newsletter. Did you perhaps subscribe to our newsletter? Because it would have been in there, but it's
did, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
Let's just look.
It's our go-to.
Yeah, newsletter ISO. Let's just see. It's 18084. Let's just have a look. It is just opening up my own newsletter, and it's going to be 140681.
Okay, great to know. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Back to you, Ophelia. Thank you for that.
What problems does this credential help you solve in your current role and field?
Yeah, so it's the problem of establishing greenhouse gas inventories for communities. So in our quest to achieve net zero, we need three different entities to work together to achieve net zero. It's governments, it's businesses, and it's the community. And all three need to work together to achieve net zero emissions. And so when it comes to governments, we've got federal, we've got state governments, and we have local governments. All levels need to work towards net zero. And then also businesses, of course, and then civil society. And civil society, the government body that's closest to civil society is local governments. And so they're uniquely positioned to establish such inventories because it's costly to get such inventories established. So mostly that's being done by local governments. And you put a geographical boundary around a local government area, around a specific community, and you can put your finger on exactly how many carbon emissions come from this region. And so it allows you to develop emissions reduction programs that are specifically targeted to a specific area. Because in one specific local government community, you might have more industry, you might have power plants. In other local government areas, you might have more forestry. So every community is unique. The emissions profile of every community is unique. But before you can start helping to address the problem of emissions and bringing them down, you need to know what the emissions profile looks like. You need to analyze what we call the carbon hotspots so that you can devise programs that make the biggest impact and that allows the community to transition. So that's how this is really, really critical. And then, of course, the city planner methods apply on a national level. And so as countries report under the Paris Agreement, they are utilizing pretty much the same methods that are being taught in that exam or that are being mentioned in that standard, the GPC standard.
I agree. And I wonder, Barbara, if, interesting, because we're often asked, well, give us a real number. How many positions are there? Well, we look, and there are all kinds of data, and it's difficult to pinpoint it. You have everything from 18 million to 85 million between now and 2030 as far as the estimated job gap goes. And I've often thought, well, it's more than these projected numbers. There are these other indicators of demand. So I wonder how you mentioned your firm needing it as these skills, and they're not quite there. Are there any other indicators of demand or numbers that we should be looking at when we get this question of, really, how do you prove it that there are jobs for our students who have these skills?
So you're still thinking specifically the city climate planner exam, or are you thinking, broadly speaking, greenhouse gas accounting?
carbon accounting, the kind of the niche area. And then beyond
Mm-hmm.
that, anything that feels like it's related. I mean, for example, supply chain managers, I think, are getting into,
Yeah.
kind of this whole value chain assessment.
Yes. Yes.
Maybe, they're specializing a little bit differently, but still supply chain, carbon accounting, there are different ways to frame these various roles
That's
and different
correct.
places to look for estimates of numbers. And I just would like to make sure that Ophelia and I are looking in all the places that you suggest, so we can say to teachers, look, we have not only
Yeah.
anecdotal examples, but there are these other
Mm.
indications and
Yeah.
assessments.
It's maybe LinkedIn would provide a good indication. How many organizations on LinkedIn are looking for sustainability managers? Because sustainability managers would be tasked with the big field of carbon accounting and carbon management, because what you said earlier about supply chain just indicates scope 3 emissions. So, scope 1 direct emissions by a company, for instance, through driving cars, scope 2, mostly the consumption of electricity, and then the huge field of scope 3s, which are emissions outside of the immediate control, happen upstream and downstream of an organization. And it's a growing field as the maturity in the market rises, and organizations are looking more towards the scope 3s. So there's a huge demand going forward for individuals who are knowledgeable in supply chain and can work with the supply chain to help address emissions in supply chain, but also value chain wise downstream of an organization. So there's huge demand, but still as part of carbon accounting and carbon management. And usually these roles are called CSR in organizations, would be CSR manager or sustainability manager. These are the usual titles that have that have this under their remit. And so a good indication would be to have a look on LinkedIn to see the number of job ads out there for sustainability, CSR, ESG managers for organization. Because I don't know about the States or Nigeria, but here in Australia, there's such a shortage, extreme shortage of these people. So you would be looking for ESG, sustainability, climate change, and then the secondary one is officer, manager, coordinator, consultant, manager. So these combinations, if you had a look on LinkedIn to see how many job ads there are, you get an idea of the demand, and that's current. And of course, projected is going to be an explosion, and we need to start training people now because we need those skills in the market. And there's a delay, of course, between training them and them being fully functional in the workplace. So it needs to start now.
Was it also what made you to
With the
start the
podcast,
podcast? Yes.
the podcast is more for the organization side of things. So you know how I said that we need governments, businesses, and civil society to work together to reduce our emissions to net zero. The podcast specifically focuses on the business side of things. So businesses are responsible for such a huge chunk of our emissions, and every business needs to think about its own transition plan to go to net zero. And the podcast is showcasing examples of companies that are doing this really, really well. And the purpose and the editorial mission of the podcast is to share those stories with other companies so they can learn from the experience of the climate leaders, and so that the barriers are made smaller for organizations to also step into and follow the leaders basically, and not be that scared and start on their own reduction journey. So it
Yeah, I
specifically
noticed
focuses on
that.
the businesses segment.
Barbara, you have the compendium of case examples for net zero campuses. Are you, or do you know of others planning to do a kind of a practice and education assessment across Australia of the secondary and tertiary schools? Kind of like looking across the disciplines to see.
Don't know about what secondary schools are up to. I only know that I know another entrepreneur. She developed Climate Clever, which is a carbon accounting tool for schools, and lots of schools have taken that up. But that's mostly helping schools themselves do the carbon inventories and become carbon neutral. So I don't know how much she would have been involved in the actual curricula of these schools. So I don't really know. So all the programs that I'm aware of that focus on schools focus on the fact that we want to help schools reduce their emissions rather than their teaching activities. So I actually don't really know.
Same thing about the GRI.
Yeah, so GRI fits at the other end of the spectrum. So if you think about it, there's this whole ESG space, so environmental, social, and governance that organizations, but also municipalities are dealing with, which is making sure that they hit both environmental, social, and governance criteria. And then the GRI is a good framework to report sustainability indicators and to follow a framework. But there are lots and lots of different frameworks available for reporting, and the most exciting one is probably ISSB, because they are now starting to establish a common reporting framework for organizations to be able to report their ESG progress and what they're working on. But this all happens in the reporting side of things. It doesn't talk about setting targets and developing a plan, a transition plan, implementing the plan. It's more about the reporting side of things. So it's different ends of the spectrum. So reporting, companies can do at any stage, but they also need to commit to targets and putting in transition plans and working on achieving those plans. So sometimes just people think ESG and reporting, but it's also about the doing and not just about the reporting. Yeah, and GRI is just one of the frameworks. It's a great framework because it makes sure that you look at issues that you might not otherwise consider.
Okay. How you came across the credential, like
the city climate planner one.
Yeah.
All right. So the way I came across it was, so let me just backtrack a bit. I'm the co-CEO of 100% Renewables, a consulting firm. And as part of our consulting projects, we often do carbon footprints for organizations, but also increasingly for communities. So it just became an important part of our work. So part of our client base is local governments, so municipalities. And initially, they would start with measuring their own carbon emissions first and developing emission reduction plans for their own operations. But the logical next step is to take it outside of their own operations and taking it to the community and seeing how they can help their communities reduce emissions and developing net zero plans. So it became increasingly important for us not to just develop carbon footprints for organizations, but also for communities. And that's how we came across the GPC through the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And when we did the research on the GPC, we saw that there is the City Climate Planner exam that you can take, and that's how we uncovered that. And it's a really good credential to have because it introduces the rigor that's needed to do proper carbon accounting for communities. And it also gives you the background information on how to do that on a national basis. Because as you might know, every country is reporting their emissions under the Paris Agreement, and they have to follow a specific method. And the method is pretty much the one that's being taught in the City Climate Plenary exam. So we found it really valuable, and it also helps. Like I mentioned it before, but it really helps with the rigor because you can go ahead and do a carbon footprint for a community, but following the rules of the GPC protocol just introduces much more rigor and making sure that the carbon account is true, as true as it can be.
What advice do you have for high school teachers and college faculties about preparing their students with regenerative skill sets in your field?
So regenerative skill set that suggests to me more of a focus around agriculture. Is that what this refers to when you say regenerative?
It's actually on a broader scale, not only agriculture, but actually in all fields.
Like you're thinking circular economy?
Yeah,
You're
circular
thinking circular
economy.
economy, climate positive, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, like to me, education needs to start in like to affect broader societal change. We need to start teaching these skills to primary school students, so they bring up this conversation in their families at home, and so that we're working on all levels, and that children demand the change that's needed. And my advice for high school teachers is that it needs to be part of the curriculum, because what we see, well, here at least, there isn't. The children get taught all sorts of things, but they don't get taught climate change and the importance of needing to transition to net zero and what it means for our lives and the choices that each and every one of us make that have an effect on emissions and what needs to happen on a societal level of changing. So these skills need to be that, like, it needs to be taught primary, secondary, tertiary, all the way through. And regenerative, definitely, like it's all those topics. It's everything combined. So there needs to be training on emissions, on regenerative, on circular economy principles, on being climate positive. All that needs to be taught. But the most pressing problem we have is the problem of climate change, because it's an existential threat to us as a species. So that's the overarching theme that would need to come through, and everything else falls underneath. And we can tick many boxes, like we can solve the climate crisis. At the same time, we can solve the plastics crisis or agricultural practices or not being circular. But the overarching theme here is mitigating the catastrophic impacts of climate change that could eradicate us as a species.
May I ask which one was the early adopter among the banks?
So the first one probably would have been Westpac. So we've got Westpac, ANZ, Commonwealth Bank, and NAB. And I think Westpac would have been the first, potentially. Well, one started and then immediately everyone else followed. But you can see, like, if you go to Climate Active, I can send you through the link. You can see how many brands are certified carbon neutral in Australia, and it's a voluntary program, and it's hundreds. It's almost getting to 1,000 companies that are now being certified carbon neutral. And so one in the sector starts, and then everyone has to follow. So lots that affects architects, affects law firms, affects, like, it's going to affect every sector. It's just going to become the
benefits can educators gain by exploring professional sustainability credentials and industries with their students?
So let me just see if I can understood it correctly. Just can you repeat that question, please? Because I think I had problems with the audio. Before you on exploring professional sustainability credentials in industry with the students.
Yeah.
Knowledge and skills. Well, the big one is that they're contributing to solving the biggest problem that we're facing as societies. That would be a big benefit outside of the knowledge and the skills, that they are solving one of the biggest existential problems.